Credit card balances rose 4.6% in the fourth quarter of 2023, topping $1 trillion, according to the New York Fed. Still, credit card debt relative to the money American households have in the bank is near 20-year lows. So here to talk about the state of the U.S. consumer is Matt Schulz, who is the LendingTree Chief Credit Analyst. So if you're to encapsulate exactly where things actually stand, even as we have what seems like an extremely high relative to previous levels, credit kind of holdings and credit levels for credit cards for consumers versus the amounts that they are actually keeping in the bank, where do we ultimately net out here, Matt?
I think where we ultimately net out is that people are doing okay right now, even though there's a ton of credit card debt and delinquencies are still rising. But the truth is that an awful lot of people are a little bit on that edge where it wouldn't take a whole lot, whether it's a job loss or a medical emergency or even just kind of a reduction of income, to shift from feeling pretty good about things to being pretty concerned. And given that this is all happening at a time of generally really low unemployment, albeit with layoffs picking up and that sort of thing, it's certainly reason for concern.
And man, it's important to put this in perspective, right? We still aren't anywhere near the levels that we saw during the height of the Great Recession, obviously. But when it comes to the pressure that is on the consumer right now, exactly what this could mean then for spending trends, how quickly do you think that landscape could potentially deteriorate, given the fact that we are getting these numbers, that it is such a jump?
Yeah, it's tough. A lot of it's going to depend on how inflation keeps trending. There are reasons to be hopeful as far as that goes, and that's a positive sign. There's also reason to be hopeful as it relates to interest rates. I don't think we're going to see them lower in the next couple of months, but certainly by the second half of the year, I would think we would. But the truth is, again, that a lot of people over the years of inflation, rising interest rates, have seen their financial margin for error in their household shrink from a pretty small amount to almost zero. And that forces a lot of people to rely on credit cards as kind of an emergency fund type of thing. So I think that there's reason to think that things may get a little bit worse before they get a little better.
How much worse, Matt?
Well, it's hard to say. I think the numbers that we get next quarter are going to be really telling, because in the fourth quarter, we pretty much always see credit card debt rise, but we also often see it decrease in the first quarter. And in 2023, we actually saw it stay flat. And it was the first time in a long time that we hadn't seen credit card debt decrease in the first quarter, and it was a really bad omen for the year ahead. What we are going to see next quarter, I think, is going to be pretty telling.
It's interesting, Matt, because you'd mentioned and alluded to interest rates as well, and it was particularly noteworthy because I harken back to the consumer confidence most recent reading that we saw, and in a comment from Dana Peterson, who's the chief economist at the Conference Board, she had mentioned that consumer confidence likely reflected slower inflation, but also something that you mentioned, anticipation of lower interest rates ahead. Just how many cuts or how deep would the cuts need to be in aggregate, perhaps, for consumer resiliency or even a comeback in or furthering of some of the trend that we are seeing in consumer confidence?
Well, honestly, I think even just a cut or two is going to make people feel better. It may not make a huge impact on their monthly bills, but I do think that after taking gut punches for 2 years with all of these interest rate increases, I think when people see that we really are on the other side of that, it'll help people feel better about things. In order to actually have a real impact on their bills, it's going to take a handful of decreases, and that'll take time. But just the fact that we see light at the end of this tunnel, it'll be a positive thing.
Matt, I need a personal finance tip, not from me, but for the person perhaps next to me.
On the other side.
On the other side, yeah. When you think about a top tip for anyone out there who is perhaps contributing to this high level of credit card debt right now or has been doing too much BNPL, how they can reverse course or make sure that they're paying things off in good time to not impact them too much?
Well, I think it's important for people to realize that they have more power over their money than they think they do. And one of the ways that they can wield that power is to call their credit card issuer and ask them for a lower rate. We've done a study at LendingTree last year that showed that about 3 out of every 4 people who asked for a lower interest rate on their credit card got one, and the average reduction was about 6 percentage points. That's a really significant thing, especially when you consider how high rates are. And I talk about this in my new book, Ask Questions, Save Money, Make More. I talk about how people can just pick up the phone, call their credit card issuer, and ask them for a lower rate, and it works a whole lot more often than you might expect it would.
All right, Matt Schulz, thanks so much for joining us here on Yahoo Finance this morning.